When God began to create the heavens and the earth, there is what's called the deep, Tahom. It is assumed by scholars that Tahom refers to Tiamat, an Assyrian deity with the Assyrian creation story, and it just doesn't match. You can't take one word and assume that the whole story is therefore referencing the Assyrian story. Instead, what you have in chapter 1 of Genesis is a direct comparison with the Egyptian Heliopolis creation story. The heaven or sky being separated from the earth with the air or firmament or rakia in between, separating them. When you get to Genesis chapter 2, verse 4, it then explains we're getting this from the Egyptian documents as they talk about human generations of heaven and earth, meaning heaven and earth are anthropomorphic characters. And then you get into the creation of mankind, as the genealogy of the Egyptians. And so what you have is a redactor who does not understand the Egyptian stories and religion, but knows that those are the origins from which he needs to write. This translation in English that I gave for When God Began does not work with the vowels given by the Masoretes. In the beginning is not accurate as a translation for Bereshit either, as the Beth at the beginning just messes everything up. But with the Tau at the end of Resh, that causes some problems as well, because you're talking a feminine plural, or if it's an Egyptian word, a feminine singular. And that causes some complications. However, taking the Tau and prefixing it to the verb bara, you now have tebera, which is a future tense indicator. And so it's will create. Resh then becomes the subject of the sentence, the head. And it's not understood who the head is because there's missing information, but it's clarified later in the text. And so the head will bring forth gods, Elohim, in the plural, as it properly should be, together with the skies and together with the earth. And so that now becomes the sentence rather than the phrase, the first phrase. And so, and the earth is the start of verse 2. And what you have in verse 2 with the different characters, it corresponds with the Egyptian Ogdod story of creation, which is an interesting thing to insert in this one passage, when the rest of chapter 1 is talking about the Heliopolis creation story. The Ogdod do not reappear in the Torah until the flood story of Noah. And there you have the 8 couples, the Ogdod, involved in a similar creation motif. Because what you have here in Genesis chapter 1 is the earth submerged in water, and it rises up from the water as the air separates the land from the sky. And what you have in the Noah account is you have a flooding that submerges the earth underwater, and then the land rises above the water in the same fashion as a creation story. And that's what's being talked about with the Genesis chapter 1 creation with the flood creation. But the redactor is also mixing up another Egyptian story, that of the main story of the Egyptians, of the first genealogy, and that of Osiris with his brother Set, and the son of Osiris, Horus, who has to restore the kingdom from his uncle Set, who murdered his brother Osiris. That's the major theme of the Egyptians, and that theme is portrayed in the Torah. And so what you have in Genesis with these creation stories is the Egyptian concept of the cycle of life. Conception, pregnancy, birth, growing up into an adult, conceiving a child, going through that cycle over and over again. And just as a child is conceived in a woman's womb, in a sack of water, the baby comes out bursting through the waters to breathe that first breath of life, and then grows up to be an adult, and he then becomes the son. The father becomes the son, as the son becomes the father. That's the main message of religion. It's sex ed, basically. And so you see scholars trying to impose Mesopotamian mythology into these creation myths of the Torah, and they don't belong. It's the Egyptians' stories for creation, which we need to spend our focus on. And it's evident with the story of creation, as the author messes up with sentences, with the days. The land separation is on the same day. The light of the first day, which is not the light of the sun and the moon, in a later day, that light is the Egyptian phoenix bird that rises on the land as it emerges from the waters, the primordial mound. And the phoenix is a fiery bird for rising from the ashes. And so it's not only involved in the birth of a new nation, but also with the death and destruction, or sunrise, sunset, as we see the morning and the evening were the first day, or the evening and the morning were the first day. And so all of these analogies, symbolisms, all tie in together to relate to each other.